The desert afternoon lay heavy across the earth, the heat rising in shimmering curtains over the endless ribbon of road that wandered through the wild summer like a half-forgotten promise. The sky above stretched wide and pale, the kind of blue that seemed too tired to darken, and the wind moved only enough to lift a thread of dust from the wagon tracks. Under that lonely sky sat a young woman in a sun-faded settler bride dress, her back pressed against the dry trunk of a crooked mesquite tree. Her hair, light brown with threads of sunfire, clung to her brow where sweat had gathered. Her name was Eloise Gardner, though the desert knew nothing of her yet. She had been left there hours earlier, discarded like an unwanted letter, after a quarrel whispered sharp enough to carve a person down to bone. Amos Cutter, the man who had brought her out here under the pretense of marriage, rode off without glancing back. He'd said she was too opinionated, too spirited, too unwilling to follow his rules. The truth lingered bitter on her tongue. He wanted obedience, not companionship. So he left her on this forsaken road, her bridal bundle tossed beside her, her future shriveling in the heat. Wagons passed occasionally, their wheels groaning as families glanced her way with uneasy sympathy. Some whispered, some pretended not to see, some pressed their lips tight as though her misfortune were a warning. But none stopped. No one wanted to take in an abandoned bride, especially one who might carry trouble in her shadow. Eloise sat upright, legs trembling with fatigue, her fingers curled around the handle of a small wooden chest. It was the only thing she wouldn't let Cutter touch, the only thing she refused to leave behind. Dust clung to her shoes, to her breath, to her thoughts. The silence pressed against her ribs. The sun dipped slightly, just enough to cast a soft gold along the horizon, when she finally heard the steady rhythm of hooves. At first she didn't lift her head. She expected another wagon to rumble by, another rider to pass with a nervous glance. But the gait slowed instead of continuing onward. A shadow fell over her feet. She felt more than heard the rider dismount. Boots scuffed lightly against the sand, careful, respectful. She raised her eyes and found a young cowboy standing a few feet from her, his hat casting a gentle darkness across his brow. His shirt was sun-bleached, his skin warm with the tint of endless summers spent outdoors. His gaze held none of the judgment she'd grown used to. Instead, there was a quiet study there, as though he were listening without words. He was younger than Cutter by many years, perhaps 25 at most, built with the soft confidence of someone whose strength didn't need announcing. He knelt slowly, resting one knee on the earth so he could meet her eyes without towering above her. He set his canteen in the sand between them and nudged it closer. No demand. No assumptions. A simple offering. Eloise hesitated, her throat tight, her pride bruised and wary. She didn't want charity. But the dryness in her mouth ached, so she reached for the canteen with trembling fingers. The water tasted like cool mercy. He waited until she finished before speaking in a voice low as dusk settling over a quiet homestead. "You look worn out. Been here long?" His words felt more like an invitation than a question. She swallowed hard, her voice dry as paper. "Since morning." He nodded, letting that truth settle without prying. His eyes drifted toward the empty horizon, then back to her. "Anyone coming for you?" A soft breath fled her. "No." He studied her again, not with suspicion, but with the careful attention of someone evaluating pain without probing it. Then he shifted, leaning his arm on his bent knee. "I'm Caleb Holt." His name hung in the warm air, simple, unthreatening. She offered her own in a hushed, reluctant whisper. "Eloise." Caleb glanced at the small wooden chest she kept pressed against her side. His eyes rested on it for a heartbeat, enough to show he noticed. Then he looked away deliberately, giving her privacy without needing to be told. That single gesture cracked something inside her. Not a wound, but a guarded place she had sealed tightly. He finally rose to his feet and stretched his hand toward her. Not pulling, not insisting. Offering. "There's shade near my wagon up the road. Some water too. You can rest, till you decide what comes next." What comes next? As if she still had choices. As if she weren't a discarded bride with no destination, and no name anyone cared to speak. But Caleb said it as though it were certain, like he saw a future still waiting for her to step into. Eloise's chest tightened. For a moment she feared that if she spoke, her voice would break open and spill all the hurt she'd been choking down since dawn. So she simply nodded. Caleb helped her stand, steadying her without gripping her too tightly. His touch was brief, gentle, warm. Something inside her, something battered and sinking, lifted faintly at that warmth. As they walked toward the wagon, Eloise felt the weight of the desert shift. The sun still beat down, the road still stretched empty ahead, but the silence no longer pressed cruelly against her ribs. Caleb walked a step beside her. Not ahead, not behind. With each quiet footfall, the truth of what had happened settled deeper inside her chest, but so did something else. A sliver of safety. A breath of possibility. They reached the wagon tucked beneath a leaning pepper tree, whose sparse leaves trembled in the heat. Caleb helped her onto the back where a folded blanket waited. She sank onto it, her limbs trembling from exhaustion she'd been pretending not to feel. He handed her a tin cup of water from a larger jug and stepped back to give her space. She let out a long, shaking breath, feeling the world steady beneath her. Caleb leaned against the wagon wheel, his arms folded loosely, eyes watching the horizon rather than her, giving her permission to gather herself. For a long moment nothing moved, nothing spoke. The desert hummed. The wind whispered dust. And then Eloise realized something that stole her breath more than the heat ever could. Caleb hadn't asked why she was alone. Hadn't asked who left her, or what she carried, or what shame she bore. He simply stayed. And in that fragile silence, a new, terrifying thought rose inside her like a tremor. For the first time since morning, she was no longer invisible. And someone, one stranger with gentle eyes, might just be the first person capable of changing everything she feared she had lost. Caleb kept a respectful distance as Eloise sat beneath the pepper tree, her hands resting in her lap as if she feared even the smallest movement might break the fragile place she'd found to breathe. The light shifted as the sun lowered, softening from harsh gold to tender amber, casting long shadows that swayed like memories across the sand. Caleb busied himself with small tasks, adjusting the saddle straps, checking the wagon wheels, tightening the ropes that held the canvas roll. Not to avoid her, but to give her room to settle back into herself. Eloise watched him quietly, her eyes tracing the deliberate gentleness in each thing he touched. He didn't rush, didn't stomp, didn't fill the silence with talk. His stillness was a kind of mercy. She found herself breathing slower just by watching him. She wondered if he had always moved this way, or if he'd learned it through some private storm he never spoke of. Caleb stepped toward her, holding a tin plate with beans and a heel of bread. He set it beside her rather than pressing it into her hands, letting her choose. For a moment she couldn't speak. Hunger clawed through her, but pride still clung to her like a second skin. She had been taught never to appear weak. Cutter's scorn echoed in her memory. How he had looked at her as though she were a burden he'd mistakenly purchased. But Caleb simply nodded at the plate, as if saying take it if you want, leave it if you don't. That look of easy acceptance loosened something inside her chest. She picked up the bread and broke off a piece. The first bite nearly made her eyes sting. It wasn't fine food, but it tasted like safety. He didn't watch her eat. Instead, he turned toward the horizon, and let the silence stretch comfortably between them. Evening drifted over the desert like a warm blanket, settling on their shoulders, softening the edges of the day. The heat broke, replaced by a warm breeze that carried hints of creosote and distant water. Eloise wrapped the blanket Caleb provided around her shoulders, drawing it close as though gathering courage. "I don't know where to go," she murmured finally, her voice brushing the air as lightly as wind against old wood. "The road feels too long now." Caleb didn't look at her immediately. He let her words sit in the air, not rushing to fill the space they opened. At last he shifted against the wagon wheel, his arms loose across his knees. "Shade Creek ain't far. Folks there might be kinder than most. But you don't owe them your story. You don't owe anyone that." His voice was calm, grounded, like footsteps on packed dirt. Something about its steadiness made Eloise's throat tighten. The thought of another town, another wave of curious stares, another set of whispered questions, sent a tremor through her. But Caleb's tone held no pressure, only an invitation to step forward at her own pace. She turned the wooden chest in her lap, fingers brushing the carved lid. She hadn't opened it since Cutter first demanded to see what she was protecting. She felt the weight of it like a heartbeat, one tied not to the past, but to a future she had not dared imagine. She kept it close, resting it protectively against her side. Caleb noticed her grip tighten, but he looked away again, letting her secrecy be her shield. That small act, so simple, so rare, made her chest warm unexpectedly. She wondered how long it had been since someone had respected her silence, instead of demanding explanations from it. A horse whinnied in the distance, breaking the quiet. Caleb rose and stepped toward the fading light, scanning the horizon. Eloise leaned slightly forward, listening. When he returned, his expression held a flicker of tension she hadn't seen before. "Town riders," he said gently. "Probably passing through. Nothing to fret over." Yet his voice carried a note of caution, something she couldn't quite place. He settled on the wagon bench, long legs stretched out, gaze steady. The quiet between them shifted, not threatening, but aware, like the desert before a shy wind begins. Eloise found her voice again, faint but earnest. "Caleb, why did you stop for me?" He rubbed his thumb across his jaw, thinking. After a moment he answered in a low murmur. "You looked like someone who'd been told too many lies about what she's worth." "I don't listen to lies if I can help it." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She felt them settle beneath her ribs, warm and startling. She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the simple truthfulness in his tone. For so long she had measured herself through other people's disappointment. Being seen without judgment felt almost foreign. A soft breeze curled around them. The desert twilight thickened. Coyotes called faintly in the distance like stray memories searching for home. Eloise tucked her knees closer, drawing the blanket around her, as though sheltering a fragile hope. Caleb gestured toward the wagon bed. "You can rest here for the night. I'll stay close. No one'll trouble you." Something in his assurance, not loud, not forceful, simply present, made her breathe easier. She climbed onto the wagon, settling against the roll of canvas and rope. The wooden chest never left her side. Caleb took a place just outside, leaning back, hat low over his brow, body angled as though he meant to guard without making her feel watched. The desert night grew darker, softened by the glow of a lone lantern he lit and placed between them. The light flickered over his face, revealing weariness she hadn't noticed before, a quiet loneliness that lived deep behind his steady eyes. Eloise wondered what roads had carved that shadow, what stories he carried in the silence he held so gently. Sleep tugged at her, but unease still twisted beneath the comfort. She stared at the stars, whispering a truth she had kept buried beneath fear. "Cutter will come back for me." Caleb didn't move for a moment. Then he lifted his head slightly, the lantern glow catching the subtle sharpness of his jaw. His voice came low, firm, something steady rising beneath it. "Not while I'm here he won't." She met his gaze, startled by the quiet certainty in it. For a heartbeat, it felt like the desert itself paused to listen. But before she could answer, before she could decide whether to believe him or flee from the hope his words ignited, the distant sound of approaching hooves drifted through the night. Closer this time, steady, purposeful. Caleb straightened slowly. Eloise held her breath as the sound grew louder, the desert darkness trembling with it. Someone was coming. The hoofbeats grew louder, steady as a heartbeat against the desert floor, until even the thin walls of the night seemed to tighten around them. Caleb remained perfectly still beside the wagon wheel, one hand drifting toward the rifle resting near his knee. He didn't grip it, didn't raise it. He simply let it lie there, a quiet promise rather than a show of force. Eloise sat up slowly inside the wagon, her breath shallow, the wooden chest held tightly in her hands. The lantern cast trembling light over her features, tracing fear and resolve in equal measure. When the rider finally emerged from the dark, the moon revealed only a lone figure on a sorrel horse. The stranger slowed near the pepper tree, scanning the area before tipping his hat in greeting. Caleb lifted his chin in acknowledgement, but did not soften his posture. The stranger spoke in a voice roughened by dust and road miles. "Evening. Didn't mean to spook nobody." Caleb's tone stayed calm. "Long road. Folks rest where they can." The man's eyes flicked toward the wagon, where Eloise sat half hidden in the lantern glow. Something in his gaze sharpened, but not with malice, only recognition. Heard tell an abandoned bride was left on this road earlier today, he said quietly. Guessing that's her. Eloise's breath faltered. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, making the stranger reveal his intentions first. Name's Tucker Briggs, the writer continued. I patrol these parts sometimes. Folks in Shade Creek were talking. Some feel mighty guilty they rode past without stopping. There was sincerity in his voice, a tired shame that softened his edges. Caleb's posture eased a fraction. Tucker dismounted and kept his distance, as though not wanting to crowd Eloise. He glanced gently toward her. Ma'am! Cutter's been stirring trouble in town. Came back mad as a rattler, yelling that you'd be returned to him by sundown tomorrow. Eloise felt the world tilt beneath her. She gripped the chest closer. She hadn't imagined Cutter's threats. They were already taking shape in the mouths of other men. Tucker added quietly, Sheriff's leanin' to his side. Claims Cutter paid for your transport, and expects you to honor the arrangement. A tremor ran up Eloise's spine. Caleb stood then, slow and deliberate, stepping into the lantern's glow. She's not property, he said, voice steady as bedrock. And she's not going anywhere she don't want to. Tucker exhaled, rubbing his brow. Didn't say I agreed with them. Just thought she ought to know. Not safe walking into Shade Creek blind. For a moment, the three of them stood in a triangle of lantern light, the desert stretching silent around them. Tucker tipped his hat and prepared to ride off, pausing only to add, Caleb Holt, you're a good man for stoppin'. If y'all need help, I'll be somewhere on the far ridge for the next day or two. Cutter won't try anything tonight, but he'll come lookin'. With that he rode off, his silhouette swallowed by moonlit dunes. Caleb turned back to Eloise, and in the hush that followed, she felt a shift inside herself. Something loosening, something beginning to rise. The fear that had kept her small began to move toward the space his steadiness offered. He sat again, leaning against the wheel, and she moved closer, resting on the wagon's edge where her feet dangled above the sand. The quiet between them wasn't heavy now. It felt like a space waiting to be filled with truth. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure how to begin. At last she whispered, I didn't tell you everything. Caleb's eyes lifted, patient and warm. You don't owe me anything. But she shook her head slowly. No. I think I do. Or maybe I just need someone to hear it. She set the wooden chest between them, her fingers tracing patterns on its lid. When she finally lifted it open, the soft scrape of hinges sounded louder than the distant coyotes. Inside lay papers, old, crisp, official-looking, along with a folded ribbon and a silver locket dulled by time. My father left me this land, she murmured. Not Cutter. Not any man. The Gardner Silver Range. He willed it to me when he passed. I didn't know its worth until Cutter came courting. He spoke soft then, real gentle, until I refused to sign the inheritance into his name. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing across Caleb's cheekbones. So that's why he abandoned you? She nodded. When I wouldn't hand over the deeds, he said a wife who disobeyed wasn't worth feeding, and left me by the road like refuse. Caleb's jaw tightened, anger flickering through his calm exterior like a spark beneath coals. But he didn't speak harshly. When he finally answered, his voice was low, steady, protective in a way that made her chest ache. That land's yours by blood and by right. He's got no claim. Eloise looked down at her hands, trembling over the papers. I thought keeping this secret would save me. Now it feels like a weight dragging me into every danger. Caleb reached out, not to take the chest, but to lightly rest his hand beside hers. Not touching, but close enough that she felt the warmth. Some things ain't meant to be carried alone, he said softly. Eloise stared at him, the lantern glow softening the rugged lines of his face. There was no pity in his eyes, only an unwavering respect that made her feel seen in a way she didn't know she'd been starving for. She felt her breath catch, not from fear now, but from the quiet possibility blooming between them. The desert wind swept gently through the branches above, stirring her hair. She suddenly realized something had changed. She was no longer thinking of escape or hiding. She was thinking of standing her ground, standing with someone. Caleb shifted slightly, lowering his voice. We'll get you to Shade Creek come morning. But we won't walk in blind. You'll have help. Even if Cutter brings the whole town, you won't face him alone. His promise carved itself into her heart like a vow. But before she could answer, before she could speak the gratitude burning in her throat, a far-off glow began to rise over the ridge. It flickered, faint but unmistakable, the echo of fire dancing against the far horizon. Caleb stiffened. Eloise's breath halted. Because flames in the desert at night meant only one thing. Someone wasn't waiting until morning. The faint rise of firelight across the distant ridge clung to the night like a warning only the wind dared to whisper. The flames weren't high, but their pulse glimmered steadily, too deliberate to be an accident, too early for travelers seeking warmth. Caleb narrowed his eyes toward the glow, reading the desert the way a man reads the lines on his own palms. Eloise, sitting near the wagon's lantern, felt her heartbeat quicken, each pulse a small tremor echoing beneath her ribs. Caleb stood slowly, brushing dust from his palms. His voice remained even, but something sharpened beneath it, like a blade wrapped in cloth. Someone's trying to force a hand tonight. Eloise felt the wooden chest dig into her side as she held it tighter, reminded of all it carried: wealth, danger, and a name Cutter intended to claim by force. The air grew heavy around them, as though the earth itself leaned in to listen. Caleb moved to the horse, tightening the cinch, checking the reins. His movements remained measured, but Eloise sensed the storm gathering beneath his quiet. She stepped forward, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. "You think it's him," she whispered. "Cutter?" Caleb lifted his head, lantern glow catching the resolve settling across his features. He didn't say yes, but the silence answered for him. Tension crawled along the horizon. The flames flickered, then vanished as though someone had snuffed them out. That disappearance was somehow worse. Eloise took a shaky breath. "What do we do?" Her voice felt small in the vastness of the desert, yet Caleb's answer grounded her. "We stay calm. And we stay ready." He looked at her directly then, his gaze steady and unflinching. "You ain't alone in this. Not now." The words slid through her like a slow-burning light, warming all the darkened corners Cutter had left behind. For the first time since meeting Caleb, she felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar but welcome. A trust shaped not from desperation, but from quiet proof. As they prepared the wagon, movement on the far ridge caught Caleb's eye. He stiffened. Eloise followed his gaze and saw shadows detaching themselves from the darkness. 3 riders, moving slowly, as if testing the night. No torches now. No sound except the faint crunch of sand beneath hooves. Caleb motioned her behind the wagon. "Stay low. Don't speak unless you have to." Eloise crouched, her fingers gripping the chest, fear and fury tangling inside her. She hated hiding, hated feeling small. But she forced herself to listen, to breathe, to trust his judgment. The riders stopped several yards away, silhouettes sharp against the fading moonlight. One man called out, his tone smug, oily, too familiar. "Evening, Holt. Heard you've been keepin' company." Eloise's stomach knotted. "Cutter." Caleb stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice steady. "You're ridin' late." Cutter chuckled, a low raspy sound that grated across the desert floor. "A man's got business when a bride of his runs off with treasure she stole." Eloise's breath hitched. She wanted to scream at the lie, but Caleb lifted a hand subtly. "Wait." Cutter continued, winding the rope of his words tighter. "Sheriff says she's to be returned to me. She and what she's hidin'. Why don't you fetch her out, and we'll end this polite-like." Eloise peered from behind the wagon, seeing his figure illuminated by the thinning moon. His hat was angled low, shadowing his eyes, but she recognized the hatred etched across his posture. Caleb's tone didn't rise, didn't shake. "She ain't yours. And she didn't steal anything." Cutter clicked his tongue. "You playin' hero now, Holt?" "That land's mine by marriage law." Eloise felt heat flood her cheeks, not from shame but from a growing flame inside her. The same flame that Cutter had tried to extinguish with every cruel word he'd ever thrown her way. Caleb didn't budge. "There was no marriage. No vows. You abandoned her on a road like a man discards trash." The desert wind grew still, as if holding its breath. Cutter shifted irritably in his saddle. I'll say it once more. Bring her out. Or we'll come take her. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. You ride one step closer, and you'll answer for it. Not with bullets. With the truth you're afraid the town will hear. Cutter scoffed. Truth? You think anyone'll believe her over me? Eloise rose before she realized she was moving. The lantern's flame trembled as she stepped into view. Her voice cut the darkness cleanly. They will when they see what you tried to steal. Caleb turned in surprise, but there was no reprimand in his eyes, only worry mixed with dawning pride. Eloise lifted the wooden chest, the weight of her father's legacy shining in her trembling hands. Cutter's expression shifted from confidence to desperation. You don't know what you're doing, girl. Eloise's voice wavered, but didn't break. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I won't hide anymore. The riders murmured behind Cutter, unsure, uneasy. The desert air seemed to stretch thin between the two sides, the lantern glow painting Eloise in gold, Cutter in cold blue shadow. Caleb stepped beside her, not shielding her, but standing as her equal. Cutter's eyes flashed with something wild. He jerked his reins. Enough of this. Boys, but he never finished. One of the riders behind him shifted, voice low and uncertain. Cutter, she's got claim to that land. Fuller at the courthouse said so weeks ago. Cutter spun, furious. Fuller lied. Another rider looked between Eloise and Caleb, doubt darkening his gaze. Or you did. A fissure cracked through Cutter's confidence. Eloise felt it. Caleb felt it. The desert felt it. Cutter's voice sharpened to a desperate, breaking edge. I'll handle this myself. He reached for the pistol at his hip. Caleb moved. Quick, quiet, precise, not drawing his rifle, but stepping in front of Eloise, body forming a shield she had not asked for but suddenly could not imagine losing. The riders jolted in alarm. Dust swirled. A moment stretched so thin it could tear. And then, hoofbeats thundered from the opposite ridge. Both Cutter's men and Caleb turned toward the sound. A lone figure rode fast beneath the rising moon, a rifle strapped across his back, his voice calling out through the night. Caleb! Eloise! It was Tucker. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode two more silhouettes, one carrying the sheriff's star glinting in the moonlight, and one carrying a torch. The truth was about to arrive, whether anyone was ready for it or not. Tucker's shout cut through the night like a whip crack, pulling every eye toward the ridge where three riders surged forward in a burst of moonlit dust. The torch cast wavering gold across the desert floor, its flame bending in the wind as though straining toward the truth waiting below. Cutter stiffened in his saddle, uncertain for the first time, as the sheriff's star glinted sharp and cold across the newcomer's chest. The riders halted several yards away, their horses snorting steam into the night. Tucker swung down first, boots landing with a thud that felt like the earth agreeing with him. Sheriff Alden followed, an older man with a quiet authority carved into his bones. The third rider, lantern raised, illuminated Eloise and Caleb, standing together in the glow of their small camp. The sheriff surveyed the scene, eyes narrowing as they landed on Cutter's half-drawn pistol. Put that down, Amos, he said, voice low but carrying. Cutter hesitated, then slowly shoved the gun back into its holster, though anger still clawed at the edges of his breath. The sheriff dismounted and stepped forward, dust swirling at his boots. Tucker told me you'd be here, he said, glancing between Eloise and Cutter. And he said you'd finally gone too far. Eloise held her breath as the lawman's gaze settled on her. Steady, searching, but not unkind. Miss Gardner. You've got something that needs settlin'. But I'm not here to drag you anywhere. I'm here to hear the truth. Caleb remained at her side, silent but unshakable. She felt the warmth of his presence like a lifeline. The sheriff turned to Cutter. You claimed she stole your property, land and inheritance. You better have proof. Cutter's jaw clenched, fury twisting his features. She was promised to me. Her father's land becomes mine by marriage law. She ran off before the vows, Sheriff. That's theft. Eloise felt words rising, trembling inside her chest. Before fear could silence her, she stepped forward, wooden chest clutched tight. The sheriff watched her carefully. "There were no vows," she said softly, her voice growing steadier with each breath. "No papers signed. No acceptance. I told him no. And he left me on the road like discarded cloth." She opened the chest lid, revealing the deeds, her father's seal, and the folded ribbon with his signature. "These are mine. My father's gift. Cutter wanted them. Not me." The sheriff reached for the papers, scanning them with practiced eyes. Caleb watched Cutter like a quiet storm waiting for lightning. After several long seconds, Sheriff Alden exhaled slowly. "Amos, this land was willed to her alone. Legally and plain. You've got no claim, not to her, not to what belongs to her blood." Cutter's fury exploded. He lunged from his saddle toward Eloise, hand outstretched like a claw of desperation. Caleb moved before anyone else could breathe. He reached Cutter first, intercepting him with a firm grip, wresting him backward as dust erupted beneath their boots. Cutter fought like a man drowning, all rage and fear and greed, but Caleb didn't strike him. He simply held him still, arms locked with unwavering restraint. "Enough," Caleb growled through grit teeth, not out of anger but out of something deeper. Protection sharpened by affection he had never spoken aloud. The sheriff stepped in, seizing Cutter's arms. "That's it, Amos. You're done." They wrestled the struggling man away, Tucker helping bind his wrists with a rope from the saddle. Cutter spat curses into the night, but no one listened. His power had melted into the sand beneath him, leaving only fear behind. As the sheriff hauled him toward the horses, Cutter hurled one last venomous shout back at Eloise. "You're nothing without a man to guard you." Eloise flinched, not from fear, but from the echo of old cruelty she once believed. Then, softly, she straightened. Caleb turned to her, brushing dust from his forearms. "You all right?" The question was simple, but the concern beneath it felt like a shelter built around her. Eloise's heartbeat steadied. For the first time, she didn't shrink. She stepped closer, looking up into Caleb's eyes, seeing the quiet devotion he tried so hard to hide. "You stood for me," she whispered. "When you didn't have to. When no one else would." Caleb swallowed, looking almost embarrassed. "You deserved better than what happened. Everyone does." "No," she said, shaking her head gently. "Not everyone. But you treat people like they matter. Like I matter. And that's changed everything." The lantern between them flickered, casting strokes of light across the planes of his face. The wind carried the faint scent of mesquite as silence bloomed softly around them. Caleb's voice came quietly, tender but uncertain. "Eloise, I ain't good with words. But if there's a path you want to walk, I'd be honored to walk near it. Not ahead of you. Just alongside." Her breath trembled. She looked down at the chest, the symbol of her inheritance, her burden, her strength, and she realized suddenly how little it weighed now. She lifted her gaze again, eyes shimmering. "Caleb Holt, are you asking what I think you're asking?" He took a breath, steady and brave. "I'm a skin if you'd consider letting me be part of whatever comes next. Not for your land. Not for debt. Just for you." The world quieted, the desert holding its breath. Eloise stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart. "And I'm saying yes," she whispered, voice full of fragile certainty. "You saw me when I was left invisible. You listened when no one cared to. If you walk with me, I'd like it to be for a lifetime." Caleb's eyes softened into something that felt like sunrise. "Then I reckon there's only one thing left to ask." Under the pepper tree, beneath the moon's gentle glow, he knelt, not grandly but humbly, as though offering his whole heart in the space of a single breath. Eloise's eyes filled with tears as he spoke. "Will you marry me?" She nodded, a trembling smile breaking through the shadows. "Yes, I will." Behind them, Tucker let out a loud, joyful whoop. The sheriff sighed with relief. The night wind stirred the branches overhead as though offering its blessing. And as Eloise leaned into Caleb's arms, the desert around them felt no longer empty, but full, filled with promise, with belonging, with the quiet certainty that she was no longer walking alone. But far across the dunes, unseen by all, another small fire kindled to life. Someone else had heard what happened tonight. And they were coming.